Welcome to The Catch Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. It's Monday morning, July 21st. My name is Walter Mullen, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
Good morning, Walter. I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In this podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in the paper. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer some additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading as we move forward. We've got two important topics to catch up on today, Emily, so let's get started.
Let's do it.
Our first topic is the redo of the Red Hook Democratic Caucus that took place last night at the high school auditorium. You were there, you saw it, you heard it. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so actually it was 4:30 p.m. The doors opened. There was a long line outside of Red Hook High School auditorium, and then that door closed promptly at 5:30 and the caucus began. We had 4 people put their names into nomination this time, not 3. And the new candidate who came up at the very last minute was Zoe Evans, a woman who has been working on the Sawkill Tributary Coalition project to try to rectify the many issues at the village wastewater treatment plant. We have a clip from Zoe Evans.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe Evans. I'm running because I want change, and I know a lot of you do too. We want to feel included, informed, and collaborative with our local representatives. We want leadership that actually represents this community.
That was very helpful.
The result was the exact same as the caucus, but for slightly different reasons. Christine Kane came in last place of 4 with just 161 votes, or 17.7% of the total. The big winner, as she was last time, was Christina Ducharme, architect and planning board member, who took 306 votes, or exactly a third of the total. Ken Migliarelli, her running mate, took 225 votes, or about 25% of the total, and Zoe Evans took 219. There were only 6 votes dividing the second and third place winners. Kenny, and instead had voted for Zoe Evans, we would have had a tie. Fortunately, we didn't have to figure that out.
Were there more people in attendance yesterday versus the first caucus in May?
Yes, there were 242 votes cast at the first caucus in May, on May 31st. There were 463 ballots cast yesterday. So almost double, a lot of people.
What do we attribute that big increase to?
Yeah. So, Walter, there was a set of factors that took place over the last couple of weeks. And that was that since July 1st, a number of people, about 87 by the tally of the Dutchess County Board of Elections, switched their party enrollment from either Republican, conservative, no party, or Working Families Party to the Democratic Party. And this is completely legal. In 2019, the state legislature, Democratic controlled, voted to change the law to allow for a shorter lag time between when you register to be a voter and when you actually vote. In addition to that, after the primary is held, and our primary in New York State was held on June 24th, there's a long window during which you can register and your party affiliation becomes effective immediately. Normally, there's no elections between June 24th and the general election, so who cares? But in this case, there was a caucus, and the caucus in Red Hook could be held anytime between July 1st and July 24th, the deadline to hold a caucus, and all of those new votes, all of those new enrollments take effect immediately. This became a very important voting block. Now, that doesn't mean that they all voted the same way, but this was a new block of Democratic voters. It didn't sit so well with some people in the Red Hook Democratic Party. A number of people felt that this new block was, quote unquote, trying to subvert the will of the party, to quote the party chair in Red Hook, Sarah Imboden, who sent a letter out about this to the Democratic Committee.
Let's pause for a minute, Emily, and unpack that phrase, subvert the will of the party. What was Sarah Imboden implying with that?
Yes, one thing I've heard is that this was not necessarily her language. This was the language of the committee. There are a number of, I believe several dozen members. I don't know exactly the number. People on that committee who helped set that agenda and coordinate that letter. It seems to be a complaint, perhaps levied by Robert McKeon and Bill Hammoud, who are also members of the Democratic Committee, that there were these new invaders into the party. coming in at the last minute and they're not real Democrats. Now, we can parse that, and many people did feel that in Red Hook, the definition of party is not the same as on the national level. We're not talking about abortion rights. We're not talking about gun legislation here in the town of Red Hook. Many people told us, including Zoe Evans, the candidate who switched her party affiliation to run, that they are not guided by those definitions of party and they want to participate. And this Democratic Caucus is a very important vehicle by which to participate in the politics of the community. Because once this ticket is set, we can talk about that as well, Republicans don't win in Red Hook. There's too few of them. Only about a quarter of the registered voter pool of about 8,000 people are Republicans. We have about 48% Democrats in Red Hook, and about a third of the population are no party independents. So if you want to participate, Walter, in the action of this town, this is your moment. And there are people who did. They were animated by the boat club, but they also want to participate in town politics.
So for the Democratic Party to say subvert the will of the party is unusual language. It sounds very defensive.
Very strong language. This change in election law that took place in 2019 was executed by Democrats, probably led by city and Westchester County Democrats, where caucuses don't exist. So they didn't consider that particular implication, it appears. And that's what election sources have told us. In many states, there are open primaries and you can register to vote that morning. What do we mean by Democratic Party? Since when, and I'm just throwing this out there, since when does the Democratic Party have this tight? Democrats have always argued they are the big tent party. And in fact, Sarah Emboden can count on her watch that she grew the Democratic Party in Red Hook by these new registrants. So it's a very interesting kind of language to use. And it doesn't seem to me terribly welcoming, but we did hear from people who spoke about it. And I think we should listen to one of those people right now, Mickey Strawinski, a former town board member who placed Christine Cain's name into nomination.
I direct this to the imposters among us who have infiltrated our Democratic caucus to manipulate the outcome. Any candidate who participated in or aligned themselves with this reprehensible farce doesn't deserve your vote today to be on the Democratic line in the November ballot. The deceitful activity taken by Sachar on this list undermines the integrity of our democracy.
Wasn't Robert McKeon himself once a party switcher?
He was a former Republican, and so was the former deputy supervisor, Bill O'Neill. The late Bill O'Neill was at one time a Republican. And as I mentioned, Zoe Evans switched her party, and Ken Migliarelli, who came in second, won. He now has won twice as a no-party candidate, which tells us that there's something going on in Red Hook about what party means and what being a committed voter means. So I think this town has some reckoning to do, and the party will probably continue to think about what that means. They will, of course, be moving, Walter, they say, to a primary system. And that's of note also because if and when that happens, a candidate like Zoe Evans would not have been able to mount a challenge 72 hours before the race. She would have had to have planned gotten her petitions and done all the things that are done to get on the primary ballot ahead of time. It won't be possible to do it in the immediate weeks. There's a 4-month block, basically a blackout block, when your party affiliation is irrelevant and your party switching is irrelevant.
What was the reaction to Zoe Evans' nomination in the room last night?
I think there was a lot of interest in her. She comes across as a very thoughtful candidate. She spoke from the heart. She read a prepared speech, but it had a folksy tone to it. Walter, looking at the results, from whom she pulled votes. And it's also hard to know whether she is truly allied with Robert McKeon and others on that town board who are still on the town board and who will remain after the November election. That would be Bill Hamill and Jacob Testa, all three of whom voted in support of eminent domain last week, or whether she's very much her own person. And we have yet to understand that. I talked to people coming into the election last night who said they were going to be listening to her speech because they were interested in what she had told the Daily Catch in a big long Q&A that we ran over the weekend. And also her work on the Sauk Hill Tributary Coalition has animated a number of people, especially in the village. Turnout was very strong from the village. I counted many people I know who live in the village who were out last night.
Let's talk a little bit about the Rupco land sale. Define what Rupco is and tell listeners some background on that and how it played out last night.
Good. I'm glad you asked about that, Walter. The issue there is completely separate from the boat club issue. There is a plan to sell a 12-acre parcel of land on the Cookingham East property, being on the east side of Route 9 as you head out of the village, to Rupco, a Kingston-based affordable housing nonprofit developer, to build an affordable housing complex on Cookingham. And affordable housing is almost like a bread and butter issue now. There's many people on both sides of the aisle who want affordable housing in Red Hook. The issue that came up at the last minute was a group of people led by the boat club, but including Ken Migliarelli, wanted to force what's called a permissive referendum. A permissive referendum is a referendum that is required by the town to be held after a certain number of voters. And I think the number is 5% of the last tally in the last gubernatorial election. So if you get that number of people to sign a petition asking for essentially a recall of the vote, the town has to hold a referendum at which voters decide whether to make that sale. Otherwise, the town board passed it, right? They unanimously passed the sale of the Cookingham East property to Rupco.
So the town board has passed the sale of the land to Rupco. There are now enough names on a petition to force a permissive referendum?
Well, we don't know yet because it looks like the town is going to challenge the petitions. And that's a story for another day, whether they are successful in challenging it. Robert McKeon said some of the people who signed the referendum, and they got just a couple over the number they need, don't actually live in Red Hook. So this will probably get challenged in court. But the relevance to the caucus is the following. People who, for the boat club, wanted to get as many people as possible to sign that permissive referendum. And they went to Zoe Evans and Kat Viega of the coalition and asked if they would help get people from the coalition to support a permissive referendum. And their response was absolutely not. We want affordable housing yesterday. And how dare you bring that issue into the boat club discussion? How dare you bring that up and try to put sand in the gears of the wheels of the town board? And this is why, Walter, it's very hard to really assess how this vote really shakes out, because we have all the candidates in opposition to eminent domain, supposedly, although some people say Christine Cain's opposition came a little too late. But at the same time, we have other factions and issues on the table that don't have anything to do with eminent domain. Zoe Evans is raising environmental concerns. She's in opposition to Ken Migliarelli, who wants to ask for a permissive referendum to pull back on that affordable housing, at least for now. We have a clip we can play.
One of the candidates who was here earlier today has already demonstrated he's willing to compromise affordable housing for those in need to gain leverage over our town government. Throwing roadblocks in front of those who are struggling to keep their families rooted here is unacceptable and not aligned with who we are. Now, with retaliatory tactics, imagine how they'll behave over the next 3 years. If you want to see leadership that governs with care, truth, strength, transparency, and integrity, choose Zoe Evans.
That was very interesting to hear. Just real quick, why does Ken and those people want to pull back on the affordable housing? What's their objection?
I don't think they want to pull back on affordable housing as an issue. They don't want Rupco to get the deal yet. They want the public to weigh in. They feel this has been another issue that's been decided behind closed doors. They want more opportunity to do due diligence on Rupco. They feel that the community has not had its chance. And they put the boat club and the affordable housing in the same bucket, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the people from the Sauk Hill Tributary Coalition do not put them in the same bucket, but there's other people who voted last night who do.
Yeah. A lot of buckets going on. So let's pull back a little bit and kind of look high level. What do the results from last night mean for the boat club?
Okay. So for the boat club, what we now know is the vote was last week 3-2 in favor of eminent domain. What that does is it gives the town board the authority to move forward on the next steps. Well, what are the next steps? Appraisal, some kind of negotiation with the boat club on how this looks. So that's going to take weeks, maybe months, and maybe years if it ends up in court. And there already are 2 lawsuits. What we know is that the 2 people who are now going to be elected to the town board, barring the unforeseen, Kenny Migliorelli and Christina Ducharme, are going to basically slide right into those 2 seats of opposition. But that's all. We don't have 3 people in opposition now. So what happens to the boat club? Probably the same thing that was going to happen to the boat club anyway, right? Unless they're successful in pulling one of those 3 votes over to their side, that process will probably just continue as it would have, right? But we have now a chink in the armor of the town board. That's the biggest change that I see to the future of Red Hook. And we already see people on social media talking about McKeon, Hammoud, and Testa all up for re-election in 2 years, in 2027. So 2 years from this fall, their terms will expire. Well, they'll actually expire in January of 2028, but they'll be up for election in 2027. Is there a groundswell of support building from the boat club? Are those people going to continue to try to put people on the ballot? They didn't put people on the ballot this time, but maybe they will next time. Is Zoe Evans going to be on the ballot? She doesn't live in the village. She lives in the town, right on the edge. Is she going to be a candidate for one of those 3 seats? There's a lot going on now, and a lot that will continue to go on over the next few weeks as we see new alliances form and so forth.
So it's a guarantee that Kenny and Christina will be on.
Yes, not only are they going to hold the Democratic line that was decided yesterday, and by the way, we also saved Deanna Cochran her job because she was going to end up not being on the party line at all if a caucus hadn't been held. But they also have gathered enough petitions to be on the ballot as independents under the party homegrown Red Hook. So they will win. It's virtually unimaginable to me that the lovely candidate for the Republican Party will be able to eke out a win. Very unlikely. Kenny will pull the Democratic vote. He will also pull the no party vote, and he'll probably pull some Republicans. Although he is not a Republican, he likely will pull that. And Christina will pull the Democratic vote. People can vote for 2 candidates. So there's going to be a very potent force for both of them to be elected.
Before we wrap up on this topic, I just want to circle back to this notion of Democrat versus Republican and what does a party mean in a small town like Red Hook? And you have talked about something that we call inside outside. You're either inside politics or you're outside politics. To me, that's sort of what is happening in Red Hook. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, as we saw when these 87 people jumped the fence. They want to be inside. They don't want to be outside.
Yes, there are people who want to be a part of it, and they recognize that the Democratic Party is the place to exercise the vote, to exercise the franchise. And that's why they came last night. They're not trying, from what I can tell, to subvert anything. They just want to participate. Some of the people who have said they want a primary system, like Mr. McKeon, like Bill Hammoud, like Sarah Bowden, and so forth, would normally welcome new Democrats to the fold, as we talked about earlier.
Let's jump ahead 10 years. How do you imagine we'll look back at what's happening right now in Red Hook politics?
Oh, God, I'd throw that to you, Walter. What do you think?
I think it will reshape things. I think it's going to end up making things different, probably more transparent. There's been a groundswell of people who want to participate, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you said transparency. We actually have a clip we can play from Zoe Evans talking to that very point. People want to understand what's going on. There was a wonderful quote from Zoe Evans saying, you shouldn't have to read deep into PDF documents to try to figure out what's going on. Your government should tell you. Because that was a very potent, and I thought, reminded me of the challenges we face in the journalism field, having to crawl through these very complex agendas to try to figure out what's actually happening. The agendas for the town board are 200, 250 pages sometimes. And I now do ask ChatGPT to read them for me, although ChatGPT often misses things. They're so dense, and sometimes the best stories are buried within them. And I wish that our town leaders would just tell me, here's where you find this or that. Transparency is going to be on the table for many years to come as we untangle ourselves from the web of frustration we see in the last few months in Red Hook.
Let's play that clip from Zoe Evans.
We need leaders who can hold complexity, build real bridges and not just pick sides, bring people into the process early with clear, honest communication, plain language, and no need to dig through PDFs or chase down rumors to know what's going on. We need people who recognize how privilege shows up.
That was great context to help listeners understand. So now let's move over to Rhinebeck, where last week immigration and customs enforcement officers apprehended a Rhinebeck resident. Tell us what happened, Emily.
Yeah, so this is the first ICE detention that we know of in Rhinebeck. There has been a previous ICE detention in Red Hook. An employee earlier this year from the Cancun Mexican restaurant was detained and deported. Let me just back up and say, with that story, there was some law enforcement involvement previously. This case, we have no evidence of there being any criminal record. The gentleman's name is Gerson Turciosby. He's from El Salvador. He worked as a landscaper for a Mexican immigrant, and he's had a successful side business and full-time life since he left Rhinebeck High School several years ago, doing work for people all over Rhinebeck and Statsburg, from what I understand. He apparently finished work at the home of one such employer on Friday and then went home to his home in the village of Rhinebeck. We are withholding the address, and was detained then and there by ICE agents who were waiting for him as he arrived home.
So do we know why he was targeted?
We do not know if or when. We will find out. Hopefully we will. A group of very concerned Rhinebeck community members, now joined by people all over northern Dutchess County and maybe beyond, has raised, I think as of a few minutes ago, over $28,000 for legal defense for him, but also possibly for others who may be detained now that we know that ICE has their eye on our communities.
Did Mr. Turcios live with his family in Rhinebeck?
That is my understanding, that he lived with members of his family, and we're not going to say who they were because we don't want to expose them.
And where is Mr. Turcios right now?
We don't know. He does have what's called an A number, and we're able to look that up. As of late last night, there was no actual facility listed on the website where you can look these details up. I suspect that now that it's Monday, we will get more information. Those kinds of databases may be updated today. He does have an attorney working on his case, and there's a Democratic political strategist who lives in the community who also has been assisting. I think we will learn more as the coming days go on, and we will be paying close attention to that.
Do we know when his family came to Rhinebeck?
We know that he went to Rhinebeck schools. Late last night, one of his former teachers who had him for 2 years reached out to offer help and possibly talk to us about his background. Apparently, it was known to that teacher a number of years ago that Mr. Turcios, then a teenager, was undocumented. He's 23 years old and was trying to help guide him in trying to get legal papers here. But we don't know what happened with that kind of advice. It's the first time a member of our own community has been detained.
You mentioned the Spot Fund campaign. Are there other ways in which we're seeing the community respond to this?
Yes, we are anticipating that starting today, there will be letter writing and phone calling to our local officials and to our state officials, specifically Sarah Hannah Shritha, our assemblywoman for District 103, perhaps our state senator, Michelle Hinchy for District 41, both Democrats, and both engaged on this issue. Both have spoken publicly about it during the Dutchess County legislature race. So we will see what they do as well to put pressure for Mr. Gerson Turcios's release.
Well, I will be following this story. We have very high readership on this story. People are very interested, and I would say very concerned.
One thing I want to add here, Walter, we are receiving close legal advice from an immigration attorney on what we should and should not publicize. For example, initially we got a copy of Mr. Turcios's passport. We decided not to include that. We were asked to include a photo ID that he had at Rhinebeck High School that has no numerical anything on it that can't be used in any way, if we understand, to hurt Mr. Turcios. So I hope our community can trust us, that we are well guided, well informed, and are not doing anything for clickbait. That's not how we work. That's not how we think. I would like our community to trust us. I'm imploring people not to post hostile language about the newspaper on social media. It just inflames the community. It inflames the people who are most trying to help. In most cases, if not all, the people who make these comments are not as well informed as we believe we are.
That's a great reminder. So let's move on to our final section, Ask Emily and Walter. I'm going to go first, and my question is actually a follow-on to what we've been discussing. Take us behind the scenes, Emily, and tell us how this story about Gerson Turcios came to us, how you got the lead, how you got the tip, and then how you chased that down, because we've been getting a lot of tips and a lot of leads about possible ICE apprehensions ever since the winter, and many of those have not been true. And suddenly we have one that was factual. How do you evaluate that, and how do you move forward?
That's a great question. Generally speaking, we don't disclose our tips and where we get our tips from. But in this case, I'm going to, because I know that it's okay to do so. We were informed by Luciano Valdivia, who is the board president of the Rhinebeck Chamber of Commerce. He then directed me to a woman for whom Gerson Turcios has done landscaping work. One thing led to the next, and I was able to get Mr. Turcios's number with ICE, and I was able to confirm that he was in their system. That was the most important thing, because when you get a tip that ICE has done X or Y, ICE can be, there are people who disguise themselves as ICE agents. There have been stories about that, who disguise themselves as police officers. So it's not a story for us until we can guarantee that someone is in the system, or until we can get an official news release. There was no such news release in this case. But I hope that explains a little bit about how we work.
Yeah. So once you saw his number in the system, was the proof you needed to validate the story?
To validate the detention. It lined up the time that he went into the system and so forth. Lined up closely with the details that we were hearing on the street from people who worked with Mr. Turcios, who have employed him and so forth. It wasn't a story with a lot of sources. It was a story with enough valid sources to go forth. We've had cases, as you know, in recent months. A few weeks ago, we had a tip that the barber at a local barbershop in Red Hook had been detained. It turned out to be totally false. And it really inflamed the community. And that's why I want to beg for calm and beg for people to let us do our job and trust us to do good work. I have a question for you, Walter.
Okay.
We know that your favorite topic is Amtrak. And we gave you an Amtrak story last week, the elevator at the Rhinecilff station. But as publisher, what is your role in helping guide the editorial coverage, or in helping determine what you consider most important in our coverage at the paper?
I definitely have my personal preferences for stories. I don't get into your swim lane too often when it comes to editorial. If I see something, then I might toss it over to you and see if you want to track it down.
What are your favorite stories? What is animating your interest in the paper as our publisher?
Well, definitely the Red Hook stories, the upheaval in politics, and I think the book club story is fascinating. So I've been very interested by that and how that is spilling over into politics. That's my biggest area of interest. Truthfully, I know there are things we haven't gotten to in terms of coverage, so we're trying to expand coverage in certain areas, and we'll get there as we grow and continue to hire more staff, especially like Amtrak stories.
All right. It's not so much as being in my lane as being inside my rails.
Exactly. So just as a reminder, please email your questions to me at walter@thedailycatch.org, and we will answer them in one of our future podcasts. This concludes this episode of The Catch Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you, as always, to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecilff for their help in producing today's episode. We also thank Esther Martell for her help with editing. Emily, let's start catching up on other stories.
Can't wait.